Breathing for peak performance. Chapter 3. Lungs. Located in the chest cavity, the lungs are two large organs of respiration and ventilation. They are responsible for aerating the blood. Ventilation is the process of bringing air into the lungs, and the respiration is the process of gas exchange in the lungs. During the exchange process of respiration, oxygen passes into the bloodstream while carbon dioxide is removed from the blood. Breathing with lungs comes with a few challenges. The airways must be kept sufficiently patent, the air must be 100% moisturized, and the lungs require constant cleaning from dust and other particles. Because air pressure is much lower than water pressure, land animals have a very large and thin surface for gas exchange to facilitate passage of oxygen into the blood. If you were to spread out the inner surface of the lungs, the size of this surface would approximate a tennis court. The lungs are located inside the rib cage and sit on top of two hemispheres of the diaphragm. Between them lie the heart and other structures within the mediastinum, containing the heart and great vessels. The lungs follow the movement of the diaphragm and rib cage due to the vacuum that exists between the two structures. Each lung is encased in a thin membranous sac called the visceral pleura. The visceral pleura intimately connected but continuous with the parietal pleura. The parietal pleura lies along the inside of the thoracic wall, the diaphragm and the mediastinum. The visceral and parietal pleura can slide on top of each other due to a thin film of fluid between them. No ligaments or muscles directly attached to the lung. Doing so would damage the lung and limit the amount of available movement. During inhalation, the rib cage and diaphragm pull the parietal pleura outward, which in turn tugs on the visceral pleura, making the lungs expand and slide into the viable space. The surface between the parietal and visceral pleura can be considered the largest joint in the body, permitting both the movements of breathing and any movement relating to the adjustments of the thorax and spine. A common misconception about breathing is that the lungs expand similarly to the blowing up of a balloon during inhalation. The reverse is true. The lungs are not expanded by pressure increasing on the inside but by the vacuum that surrounds them. To create a model of this mechanism, cover a glass with a flexible membrane. Two balloons, the lungs, are stuck inside the glass with their opening to the outside of the container. If you pull the membrane downward, a negative pressure is created around the balloons, expanding them outward as air rushes into the balloon. It is important to keep both the rib cage and diaphragm strong and flexible in order to make sure the lungs can be stretched and moved on a regular basis to remain pliant. Each lung is divided into lobes separated from one another by a tissue fissure. The right lung has three major lobes. The left lung has, which is slightly smaller because of the asymmetrical placement of the heart, has two lobes. Internally, each lobe further subdivides into hundreds of lobules. Each lobule contains a bronchiole and affiliated branches, a thin wall, and clusters of alveoli. These lobes need to be able to slide on top of each other during respiration and during movements of the torso. Lack of exercise and poor posture contribute to reduced mobility in the lobes as well as the whole lung within the thorax, impeding full breathing. An example of a yoga asana in figure 3.4, we can see the necessity of having mobility in the lobes of the lung and the organs adjoining the diaphragm. Alveoli are the tiny air sacs in which the actual gas exchange takes place. Each lung contains about 480,000 alveoli, which is one reason the inner surface of the lung is so large. The alveoli are covered by surfactant to reduce the surface tension created by the thin film of water inside them. As you inhale, much of the resistance to the expansion of lungs stems from this surface tension within the lungs. Inhalation is further resisted by the elastic tissue of the lung and by any lack of compliancy in the joints, fascia, and muscle of the ribcage and diaphragm. Good posture is essential to good lung function. If we slouch, the lungs will simply not be able to expand fully. In addition, the lungs will become less flexible and lose some of their elasticity because the heart sits on the diaphragm and between the lungs. It is also negatively affected by the slouched posture. Following are six exercises and imagery explorations for the lungs. Lungs, pleura, and ribcage. It may feel as though the filling of the lungs with air is what expands them, but the reverse is true. In fact, the lungs are pulled outward by the ribcage and diaphragm, creating a vacuum in the lungs, drawing the air in. In this exercise, you will embody how the lungs are pulled into expansion by the surrounding vacuum. In a comfortable upright sitting or standing position, imagine the lungs inside your rib cage sitting on the diaphragm. As you inhale, imagine the diaphragm pulling the lungs downward while the ribs pull the lungs forward, sideways, and to the back. To embody how this works, try imagery as the syringe or the bellows. The bellows is widened to draw the air in by creating a slight vacuum within it. In the case of the syringe, the sliding plunger represents the moving diaphragm. Pulling upward on the plunger to create suction represents the inhale. Pushing it down represents the exhale. Exhalation is more passive, powered by the recoil of the lungs, muscles, and associated fascia. Unless you are in the supine position, the abdominal wall will actively assist in exhalation. Inhale again and imagine the sequence of events that expands the lungs. The ribcage moves outward and pulls on the parietal pleura. The parietal pleura pulls over the visceral pleura and the visceral pleura expands the lungs. During exhalation, the sequence reverses. The lungs recoil, pulling the pleura and ribcage inward. Costodiaphragmatic creases. Visualizing how and where the lungs move when you inhale helps improve your breathing. The lungs expand outward during inhalation, but they also slide into available space between folded layers of parietal pleura. One of the largest of these layers lies between the lowest ribs and the back of the diaphragm at the junction of costal and diaphragmatic pleura. This area is called costodiaphragmatic recess. In a comfortable upright sitting or standing position, place your hands on the back and bottom of the rib cage and visualize the area between the ribs and diaphragm. As you inhale, imagine the lungs sliding into this area. They are opening the space between two folds of parietal pleura, one covering the diaphragm, the other covering the inside of the rib cage. Compare the feeling to sliding your hands into a glove. As you exhale, the lungs slide out of this area and the costal diaphragmatic pleura close. Inhale and exhale several times and imagine the lungs sliding into the costodiaphragmatic creases. Use the metaphor of sliding your hands into gloves to help you with embodying this anatomical function. Lungs as sponges. The lungs can be compared to large sponges that can fill with air by expanding and empty themselves by air contracting. It is important to practice exhaling as much as possible to increase the elasticity of the lungs. In a comfortable upright sitting or standing position, place your fingertips on your right and left shoulders. The elbows are pointing to the sides. Exhale rapidly while moving your elbows and arms forward and flexing your spine. Imagine the lungs as sponges squeezing out the air. As you inhale, slowly extend your spine and move your arms, elbows back again. Imagine the lungs as sponges filling with fresh air. Match the movement with your natural breathing capacity. Do not force your exhalation or inhalation. Repeat the sequence 4 or 5 times. Repeat the movement 2 or 3 more times, but this time, as you inhale, focus on the expansive power of thorax and diaphragm. As you exhale, focus on the elastic recoil of the lungs. Spiraling lungs. As you inhale, the lungs not only expand but also rotate slightly outward. This rotation occurs because of the movement of the ribs and diaphragm. Imagining this action will free your lungs and lead to deeper and fuller breathing. In a comfortable upright, sitting, or standing position, place both your hands on your right lung and the left hand is on the lower part and the right is on the upper part. As you inhale, imagine the outward rotation of the lungs. Support the action by slowly sliding your hands laterally on the rib cage. As you exhale, imagine the lungs rotating internally. Support the action by slowly sliding your hands medially on your rib cage. Repeat the breathing imagery and touch 3 times. Remove your hands and compare the breathing capacity of 2 lungs. Inhale into the lung on the side you practice, then inhale into the other lung. You may notice that the lung you practice with is more flexible and can breathe more fully than the other. Repeat the exercise on the other side. Finally, imagine both lungs at the same time. As you inhale, they expand in all directions but also move laterally. The right lung moves to the right, the left lung moves to the left. Imagine the movement as 2 cogwheels moving in opposite direction. Expanding the tops of the lungs. The tops of the lungs with the pleura are higher up than you may think. They go beyond the first rib and are behind the clavicle. Ligaments connect the pleura to the first rib and the cervical spine. These connections keep the lungs from being pulled down during inhalation. In this exercise, you aim to experience your breathing in this area as well. In upright position, sitting, or comfortable standing position, place your right hand on your left shoulder. Your thumb should be touching your neck. Imagine the pleura below your touch as you inhale deeply. Imagine the lungs reaching up into this area as they expand. The lungs are moving up beyond the top rib. As you exhale, imagine the lungs moving down again. For several breath cycles, imagine the lungs expanding into this area adjacent your neck. Remove your hand and rest your arms at your sides. Breathe into both lungs and notice any differences in breathing capacity. You may also notice the left shoulder has relaxed. Repeat the exercise on the other side. Supine breathing practice. The supine position facilitates breathing because gravity is not pulling the organs downward as in the standing position. Exhalation is facilitated. In this exercise, you use this fact to lengthen your exhalation and create deeper, calmer breathing. Lengthening your exhalation increases the parasympathetic activity of the autonomic nervous system. This leads to state of relaxation and regeneration. Lie comfortably on the floor in a supine position. You can stretch out your legs or bend your knees to 90 degrees. Visualize the important structures of breathing: the rib cage, the lungs, the diaphragm, and the abdominal muscles. Feel how gravity is acting on your ribcage and lungs. Allow the right lung to rest in the right ribcage, the left lung in the left ribcage. Imagine the diaphragm moving down as you inhale. Feel the abdomen walls moving outward, upward during this phase. Imagine the diaphragm moving upward as you exhale. Feel how the abdominal wall moves inward, drops down towards the spine during exhalation. Notice any other areas in your body where you may experience breathing. Notice your pelvic floor and movement in your rib cage. Imagine your rib cage to be very flexible for breathing. As you exhale, imagine your rib cage dropping down like a soft piece of cloth. During exhalation, also imagine the lengthening of the muscle fibers of the diaphragm. Exhale on a sibilant S to lengthen your exhalation. Take a few natural breaths, then repeat the S. Notice whether your breathing has become slower, calmer, and freer. Take your time to rise to a standing position and aim to maintain full and free breathing in your daily activities and exercise practice.